Hello, you're watching Eye on Africa on France 24. I'm Vedika Bahel, and here's the top headlines from across the continent. The gravest crime against humanity. That's how the United Nations General Assembly has voted to recognise the transatlantic slave trade. The landmark resolution was led by Ghana and goes beyond simple acknowledgements, asking nations involved to consider apologies, paying reparations and returning stolen artefacts. The resolution passed even though the US voted against it and over 50 countries abstained. In a visit to top African trading partner Algeria, Italy's Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni said the two nations would work to increase deliveries of Algerian gas as Rome seeks extra supply amid disruptions from the Middle East war. And the conflict in the Middle East risks crippling Kenya's flour industry, with losses up to $1.4 million a week since the war began. There's worries for local jobs as the flour industry currently employs up to 500,000 Kenyans directly. Thank you for joining us. We'll be starting this bulletin with our top story. The United Nations on Wednesday voted to recognise the transatlantic slave trade as the gravest crime against humanity. The resolution was led by Ghana and was adopted despite resistance from the US. Over 50 countries chose to abstain, including EU member states. The resolution marks a new step in Africa's efforts to seek accountability for historical injustices, where millions of enslaved people were trafficked over centuries. It urges countries to consider formally apologising for the atrocities that occurred and providing financial reparations, as well as for cultural artefacts looted during the era to be returned. Our correspondent in New York, Jessica Lemazurier, has this.
It's a move towards justice and healing. The UN General Assembly voted to recognise the transatlantic slave trade as the gravest crime in human history. On Wednesday, Ghana's President John Mahama came here to the UN in person to promote this resolution put forward by his country.
We come together in solemn solidarity to affirm truth and pursue a route to healing and reparative justice. The adoption of this resolution serves as a safeguard against forgetting.
This resolution calls for formal global recognition of this historical crime and opens the door for reparatory justice measures. It also urges the restitution of stolen works of art. Well, the vote in the General Assembly was passed with 123 votes in favour, 3 against and 52 abstentions. Argentina, Israel and the United States were the 3 members that voted against the resolution. France and the UK were amongst those that abstained. Whilst the resolution really got the backing of much of the global south, it did prove controversial for some Western powers, mainly because they are concerned about the mention of reparations. They argue that modern governments should not be held legally liable for historical crimes. Supporters argue, however, that this is about recognition of justice, not blame for current generations, and that it is part of a process towards healing. Toronto youth poet Shahada Jack read her poem Reclaiming Our Pen in the General Assembly, honouring those whose stories were never given the chance to be told.
Having this conversation in a global sphere and in a global space like the United Nations, I think will continue to empower the youth to speak their truth and to learn the truths of our world.
Ghana's president quoted Martin Luther King in his speech in the General Assembly Hall. The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice, he said.
At least 15 Zimbabweans have died fighting for Russia in the war in Ukraine, the country's information minister announced Wednesday. He said those who lost their lives were duped into enlisting, saying one method involved employment agencies targeting people on social media, promising lucrative salaries before facilitating their army recruitment. It's the latest African nation to report recruits killed on the front lines. There's been similar reports from Kenya, Ghana and South Africa. Next, Italy's Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni travelled to Algeria on Wednesday, her second visit to the country since taking office. As well as strengthening bilateral relations, she's on a quest to secure additional gas supplies from Algiers amid the severe disruptions triggered by the war in the Middle East that's halted the production of liquefied natural gas in Qatar. She says the two countries would work together to increase deliveries to Rome, though there's no details on when and how were provided. Algeria is already Italy's top trading partner on the continent and provides around 30% of the country's natural gas via the Trans-Mediterranean pipeline. Let's take a listen now to the Italian PM.
We've decided to strengthen our already solid partnership, which also involves two national champions, Eni and Sonatrach, including by working on new fronts such as shale gas and offshore exploration. This will, of course, also make it possible in the long term to strengthen the flow of gas supplies from Algeria to Italy.
Well, for more on this, let's bring in now Toyin Akinosho, publisher at Africa Oil and Gas Report, speaking to us now from Lagos, Nigeria. Welcome to the programme. Thank you for joining us here on Eye on Africa. Algeria and Italy have decades' worth of energy cooperation. Do you think Algeria has anything to gain from this energy crisis?
Yeah, a crisis is an opportunity for business in its own way. And I think that if Algeria can increase its gas supplies to Europe, that's a real opportunity. My challenge is that there isn't much of a headroom, for Algeria to increase those supplies in a very short time. It will take a bit of time to increase what Algeria is supplying currently. It has to take around 3 to 5 years if you're developing new fields. What they have currently is, let's just say, there won't be much more. You can't have more than 500 million standard cubic feet of addition over a year, in the next 2 to 3 years.
Well, that brings me nicely to my next question, which is where do African countries stand with its energy resources? Could other countries on the continent step up to provide oil and gas? Do they have the resources, do you think?
Well, the resources it's not whether they have the resources are there, but the point is that most of them are not in developable format as it were. Or Mozambique has a large pipeline of projects, but those molecules will not get to the markets in the next 4 to 5 years, and that's not the kind of timeline Europe is looking at. Nigeria has been struggling to export more. We've exported much more than we've done in the last 1 year, but we're also pretty much stuck. We have projects coming up, but those projects also won't get to the market in the next 3 years. So, and those are the two geologically sound gas resources. Elsewhere on the continent, Egypt is struggling to, supply gas to its own market. Its production has been declining. It's not finding new gas. Libya has more, but it's tiny relative to what Europe really, really urgently wants. So that's pretty much of a challenge across the continent. I think geology is an issue here.
So would you say it's mainly logistical and infrastructural issues that's preventing African countries?
No, it's not just logistical. For Nigeria, it is largely logistical. For several other countries, it's simply geological. Angola is trying to step up the volume of production, but they simply don't have that gas. They don't have the volumes. Equatorial Guinea, they are developing some gas supplies, but these are very they will get in the market, wet, appetites, but they are not the significant volumes that the world needs now.
And you mentioned Nigeria, so let's talk about that. This week, the Dangote refinery has begun exporting to other countries within Africa. Do you think that could redesign the energy trade within the continent, from Africa to Africa energy trade?
Oh yeah, I was pretty much excited when I learned that Côte d'Ivoire will be getting. It's a shame really that Africa doesn't trade with itself, and so when in the last 1 year, Dangote has been supplying gasoline, but he hasn't really been exporting much gasoline since it came out. You know, it's been exporting gas oil and, you know, other products, you know, to Europe, to other places. But Africa hasn't been part of that, you know, part of his radar in the sharp form. But right now, with all this crisis happening, African countries are coming on board, you know, that perhaps South Africa will join. I mean, a lot of countries, South Africa, for example, gets a lot of its imports from the Middle East. Now that the Middle East is curtailed, it would have to look around down the continent, or north of its country, and look at Nigeria. Dangote should have enough to supply the continent, really, to mitigate the supply gaps.
And do you feel that's something that should be the priority going forward? Supply within the continent?
Yes, Dangote sees the opportunity. He wants to increase its production of gasoline, where he wants to increase the capacity of his plant from roughly 700,000 barrels per stream day to 1.4 million barrels per stream day in the next four years. And its target is largely Africa. He also is targeting other countries of course, elsewhere in the world. But Africa does not have enough capacity. The refineries are not coming on stream, you know, as quickly as they need to. So, Dangote is a very important supplier. I think that is important for Africa because of Africa should be trading with itself, just as simple as that, yes.
I think that's all we have time for. Thank you so much for joining us. Toyin Akinosho, publisher at Africa Oil and Gas Reports. Thank you so much for being here on Eye on Africa. To Kenya now, one of the world's largest players in the global flour market. The war in Iran is costing the country's flour industry up to $1.4 million a week. Growers say the losses are due to a decline in demand and disruptions to traditional shipping routes. Experts warn it could risk job losses in an industry that directly employs up to 500,000 Kenyans. Laurent Bashika has more.
In this warehouse south of Nairobi, workers carefully cut, trim and assemble vibrant flower arrangements. Most of these roses are destined for export, but since the start of the US-Israeli war on Iran, the company says sales have dropped by more than half.
We used to export around 400 to 450,000 stems in a day, but currently we are hardly doing 150,000 stems a day, 150,000 to 200,000 stems a day. It's almost 50% we are discarding.
Kenya ranks among the world's top flour producers, with the industry generating over $800 million a year according to the country's central bank. But the rapidly expanding sector has been hit hard by the war in Iran. Rising fuel and shipping costs are making exports less and less viable, especially towards Europe and the Middle East, two regions that represent 85% of Kenya's total flour market. In addition to these hurdles, producers say demand has dropped drastically since the start of the conflict.
The buyers whom we sell to are not making orders. So by and large, if I will tell you, in the last 3 weeks, we have lost about 4.2 million worth of flowers.
If these conditions persist, Kenyan growers and producers warn they may soon be forced to downsize operations, potentially resulting in massive job losses in a sector that directly employs over 500,000 people.
Well, that's all we have time for in this edition of Eye on Africa. Do stay with us, though, on France 24. There's more world news coming up.